Well, I appreciate that introduction. You know, I was sharing with some folks I visited with last night. I make it down to Paducah probably about 3 to 4 times a year, and it's amazing every time I get to visit down here. That Leadership Kentucky group about 3 years ago was very unique just because we got to, go by the, I guess it's the theater event space over here, and a number of areas we got to really check out in Paducah, and visited with your Mayor Brandy at the time. And you all, it's amazing out here. I've got to say, I haven't got to spend a lot of time in this area of the state. I'm from and live up in Lexington and based in Frankfort. It's really interesting the feel that downtown has. I see a lot of opportunity, and it reminds me of the feeling we have up in Frankfort right now. As you might know, there's been an election recently, and I'm not really a political person whatsoever, but what it does mean is it's a season of change we're dealing with, and it's an opportunity to hit reset and say, how can we embrace opportunity zones across Kentucky, regardless of your political view? And so myself and our general counsel in the office had served as the federal liaison for opportunity zones for Kentucky. For those of you that may or may not have been following this, it's been quite a process as these federal regulations have been continually updated, and we're finally to a point where we have got those to a finalized state. The thing that I would preface with this presentation is this is a good informational starting point if you're looking at how do I create a business in an opportunity zone, how do I form an opportunity zone fund. I would say my disclosure is this, and that is consult with a CPA, an attorney that has familiarity in this area or that's building kind of subject matter expertise, so to speak, just because it is quite cumbersome, the elements around this. And certainly I'm just a purveyor of information with about 60 slides to share with you, and I will go through them as overview and as quickly as I can, and try to make this material not dry. So that being said, we'll get on to the presentation. If you have questions, save them for the end. Interject if you've got ideas. One of the things that I really admire about Paducah in this area is where you've designated your opportunity zones. I'm going to get into how opportunity zones were selected, but I really like the census tracts that you all have here and what that's going to mean for opportunities for growth here in Paducah. What are opportunity zones? Low-income distressed census tracts where investors can receive significant tax breaks and deferrals for investments. Hope everybody got a copy of this PowerPoint so you can reference at a later point as well. The whole idea behind this is to create wealth and jobs in these census tracts, typically that are encountering a not seeing the economic prosperity that other areas are. You know, when I recently visited with Senator Tim Scott out of South Carolina, and I don't even need that microphone because I'm so loud. His staff up in D.C. actually created the legislation around opportunity zones, and it's incredible to see across the country how opportunity zones are being embraced and looked at. My mission is, how do we get that more embraced in Kentucky? Yes, no problem. So here is a timeline of the opportunity zones. Tax Cut Jobs Act of 2015 passed. Each governor of the state asked basically and did a call for what census tracts do you want to have recognized in your communities. That was a public call across the state of Kentucky. And Kentucky has actually been a leader in getting the census tracts certified and designated across the state, and then having this program kicked off and up and going so it can be officially rolling. So, April 2018, U.S. Treasury Department certifies the nominations, and we have 144 designated Opportunity Zone census tracts. To qualify as low income, a census tract must meet one of the following qualifications. Tract has a poverty rate of at least 20%, or the census tract is in a metropolitan area and family income does not exceed 80% or greater of the metropolitan area median family income or the statewide median family income. So the first part of this presentation is mainly just the nuances of what qualifies as a census tract to be an opportunity zone. As we get more into the presentation, I'm going to hit on the really good stuff, which is, and to me I think it's the fun part of the presentation, which is what are potential ideas for these projects? How do we take, and kudos to your community here in creating this prospectus. This is one of the best ones I've seen in Kentucky. Absolutely incredible. You know, rock on. This is just absolutely incredible. This is what every community in Kentucky needs. We don't have. You all have it here. You're one of the very few that has this. And what it does is it equips you to be able to send this out to qualified investment funds and say, here's a potential project. Come on out to Paducah, make a visit, and look at this. So, as we're talking about the selection of opportunity zones, Kentucky has 573 low-income census tracts. Up to 25% of those, or 144 tracts, could be selected and designated as opportunity zones. And then this is just talking about the process related to picking opportunity zones. The reason I include this slide in here, and we've included this, is what's happened is there's some communities that didn't respond when there was a call for proposals. So now the census tracts are designated and set. Then there becomes a question of, well, what was the process to get this, and was there like a something nefarious with it? Certainly, this slide is meant to say there was nothing nefarious with it. It was a process where there was an open call for proposals. Do you have a census tract you want to designate in your community? And then we also used what's called this enterprise mapping tool to look at which low-income census tracts have the most potential for growth, have the most potential for, if they have capital investment, to be able to grow and create jobs in these areas that are economically depressed. And then there at the bottom, very notable, eligible tracts that the mapping tool pulled up that communities did not respond were not included in that potential for consideration. As you see there, we worked with mayors, judge executives, economic development leaders from around the state in this call for proposals. As we said, we nominated and had the U.S. Treasury certify 144 census tracts for Opportunity Zone designation in Kentucky. That was our maximum allowable number, leading to 84 counties that actually have Opportunity Zones in their areas. And interestingly enough, it is interesting how the disparity of these census tracts happen. That's the next one on here. And so what I had our marketing team do at the office is put together some zoom-ins on your areas out here in kind of greater Paducah, and I'll highlight that to kind of give an idea of those census tracts for those of you that may or may not be aware. Always good to kind of reference, of course, as you're looking at projects. You know, for folks in the room, how many folks in here are interested in putting a business together that's going to receive Opportunity Zone funding or fundraising? Is anybody looking at it from that perspective? So I see a couple of hands. Is anybody in here looking at forming a qualified Opportunity Zone fund? It's always good to kind of know what folks are thinking on this, and I can kind of create some comments, nuances related to that. Basically, it's a fund that's designated by the IRS that's going to receive the tax benefits related to being a qualified Opportunity Zone fund. You see a potential project you want to invest in, you can bring in investors and make that investment through that fund. And it's actually almost scary simple what it takes to create the fund. Now granted, you've got the other element of raising the money and finding viable projects that meet your investment criteria, but certainly the front end of forming the fund is something that's pretty straightforward. So, and the thing that I would share with everyone here, we had a really unique thing that happened back in the fall in Frankfort. We're getting calls from qualified Opportunity Zone funds, say funds that have $400 million, $500 million in their fund, and they're looking to make investments immediately due to kind of the timing of the year and working on trying to, tax deference and all those kinds of things, looking at projects, and what they're doing is they're calling, and, hopefully this isn't a bad word, they're calling Louisville. They're calling Louisville, and then they're calling Frankfort. Is there anything in Louisville that's going to meet the investment criteria? To me, what that means is we got a real opportunity to embrace this program, to use the prospectus to say, here is business projects that's going to meet the typical investment criteria for a qualified Opportunity Zone fund. Connecting the dots on this thing is very interesting. There's a lot of elements related to it, but how do we take a fund that's on the coast or that's in St. Louis and put in front of them a project that's in Paducah that's going to change Paducah for the next 30 years and say, this is a project that's going to meet your investment criteria, it's going to be a successful business based off our projections, and it's going to be transformational for the community. To me, that's where the opportunity really lies with this. Opportunity Zones is meant to create obviously jobs in these economically depressed areas. The reality is around the country, it's really being embraced as a real estate play. Multifamily housing, affordable housing, everyone is leaning into this for that reason because I don't want to say there's a loophole, but that's essentially what it is. And are those types of activities leading to job creation? That's a policy question, but what it is happening is we're starting to see across the country more and more folks looking at it from a business opportunity, investing in a business, and I don't have those percentages right offhand, but that's something that I would certainly be thinking about as you look at it from a community perspective. How do we embrace this? How do we come up with business ideas? How do we come up with real estate projects that we can pitch to these funds that are all around the country looking for projects and get them to bring their money in here and do, a lot of folks would call that economic gardening is kind of the model of it. So here's another map, and this map's actually taken from the KYOZ website. KYOZ.com is a website we maintain at the Cabinet for Economic Development. Folks can go on there and list potential projects. They can also go on there and list and register a fund that says, hey, we're open to investing in projects, we're looking for projects, how do we get in touch with folks on that? So again, another nice map there to kind of show the disparity across the state and where those are. So I had Claire at the office kind of insert in, and I love how she did this, a very detailed map for the opportunity zones you have here. And I'm assuming in the prospectus, it's been a few weeks since I've looked at that, but I would assume that it has it in there as well, right? Yeah. And so very interesting. I believe the hotel I stayed in last night is in an opportunity zone down right over here. So definitely very, very interesting. And I'm going to go to the next slide, but you've got it in the prospectus too. So here's some opportunity zones kind of in this greater area that I wanted to include for everyone as well. Not quite the zoom ins, but it shows the census tract. The census tract for each one. Good to make a note of that. So I always include this one for Fayette County, Lexington, as I've given this presentation a number of times across the state. You know, it's very interesting when you look at this map. Okay, Fayette County's got some census tracts designated. You know, it is what it is. You go to the next slide, East Vine Street. Does anyone know what that address is down at Triangle Park? So interestingly enough, the city of Lexington designated to have Rupp Arena, the park down that is, I guess, to the west of Rupp Arena, and then all that area out through there, which is economically depressed, all designated as an opportunity zone. And so it's all interconnected down there. So I always like to show this because it's interesting. You know, when you look at a lot of the census tracts designated around the state, they're very rural. They're very, you know, they're in some cases they're I think very correct in being downtown, as you all have it here in Paducah. But kind of interesting that is. And then if you go just down the road, we were just on Vine Street in Lexington. If you go just down the road, and I don't know if we got any UK fans here. I'm a big UK fan. So Coach Cal's house, which is just down the road from Vine Street, downtown Lexington, is not in an opportunity zone. So that's what that slide is meant to show you. That residential area is not hitting that, and that's about less than a mile from down there. So again, what we're looking at is maximizing the benefit for Kentucky on these opportunity zones. Specifically, how can we do that here in Paducah? I think not on the slide, but I think the first thing is creating the awareness that this is out there, that these funds are looking for investable opportunities that are going to meet their kind of investment criteria. You know, and then how do we identify projects and bring those folks in and make that connection? Certainly, from my standpoint, as I'm getting the calls in Frankfort, and I can have our partners in Louisville as well, as they're getting calls, you know, we could connect those folks down here if you have a project that you know, you're looking at trying to raise opportunity zone funds with. As noted early in the presentation, Kentucky was one of the first states with the opportunity zones being certified. You know, our Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development is serving as our federal liaison for, you know, for the state of Kentucky. Made several trips to D.C. and met with those folks up there on this, and how we can get it more embraced across Kentucky. Again, we're working to maximize the benefits of opportunity zones in Kentucky. It's very interesting as you go across Kentucky and how these census tracts lay and what the economic potential is. As I mentioned, I think you have a gold mine here with where the census tracts are designated in downtown Paducah, and so kudos to you all for where that's selected at. Again, the kyoz.com website is an interactive website where you can go online and click in there and look at where does the census tract and the maps fall and all that kind of stuff, and so very interactive there. So the next part of the presentation is on investing in opportunity zones. As I mentioned, the investments are made through a qualified opportunity zone fund. Qualified opportunity funds are investment vehicles set up as a partnership or corporation for the purpose of investing in opportunity zones. 3, the contribution of money can only contribute money that has been generated through prior investments. An investment in a qualified opportunity fund must be an equity investment, which is broadly defined to include stock and/or partnership interest. Advantages of investing in an opportunity fund. Say you all want to form a Paducah-based opportunity zone fund to look at these types of projects. You know, in another one of my roles with the Cabinet for Economic Development, I've done a lot with our angel investing and venture capital networks across Kentucky, and we've got some groups that are very strong in Lexington and Louisville. A group formed down in Somerset that's doing a lot of stuff down in the Somerset, London, Corbin area. Again, those types of funds would very much benefit in saying, okay, we want to go through this path and take advantage of the tax advantages laid out with this. Again, advantages: temporary deferral of inclusion, in taxable income for capital gains reinvested in an opportunity fund. Step up in basis for capital gains reinvested. Permanent exclusion from taxable income. And then there's some nice accounting legal details there you can dig into this afternoon. Some further details there on qualified investments in a qualified opportunity fund. So the whole point here is, how do we attract capital investment? The Economic Innovation Group, and I mean this is an incredible stat, have noted that there's $6.1 trillion in unrealized capital gains being held in U.S. households and corporations and eligible for investment in opportunity funds. The whole point is, how do we get the folks that are having success, they have the ability to invest in projects that are in these types of designated areas. Question earlier about how to be a qualified opportunity fund. Basically, you're self-certifying, designating with the IRS on doing that. So if somebody wanted to form a fund and go through that process here in Paducah, a Western Kentucky fund, it could be any way you want to form it. This is kind of the process to certify and to be able to get designated as an opportunity fund. If somebody decides to go down that path, a group of folks are saying, okay, we want to form the fund, we want to do something that's West Kentucky focused, Paducah focused. Certainly I think there's a lot of funds out there that you could look and reference kind of best practices. Okay, well, what's their investment criteria? We had an event last May in Frankfurt with the Chinese delegation, U.S.-China trade event, which, given all the back and forth with China, which was very interesting, that event. But one of the most interesting things about that is we had several qualified opportunity zone funds that came in for the U.S.-China event. You've got the Chinese USA Bank that's looking at how do we make investments in projects in the U.S. They wanted 4 projects totaling $1 billion. That's what they were looking at for investing in Kentucky. And so, it's almost the most massive paradigm shift when you start thinking, okay, well, I don't really need 500,000. I mean, we need to be thinking like 20 million. What's a project that's going to hit 20 million, $50 million that we can achieve the investment criteria, we can line up the workforce, we can line up the contracts and all the types of things that is associated with that. And so, I would encourage you, whatever as a community you all are looking at on growing and taking Paducah to that next chapter, I think this is an incredible tool to do that, number one. Number two, I would say think big, because the things that I'm seeing across Kentucky, you have folks that are trying to do, let's say, a small mom and pop type business venture that is not scalable, and the out-of-state funds are really not looking at those kinds of things. They're looking for big opportunities where folks can really make some money along the way and create jobs and all those kinds of things. More details on the Qualified Opportunity Fund and details there. Get a lot of questions on about the self-certification and annual reporting, the 90% asset test. There's some details and nuances in this where as I gave the example before, somebody's forming a venture capital fund or a angel investment group in Kentucky, and they decide to go this route, one of the considerations that's very important to keep in mind is you're going to be faced with how much of the assets of your fund is invested in Opportunity Zone projects. And so you may want to segment the fund if you're looking at having a portion of it in Opportunity Zone projects and a portion in non-Opportunity Zone projects. Again, the 90% asset test dates, and something to definitely keep in mind if you go down that path. Considerations related to the 90% asset test. Ties right in, this slide ties right in with what I was talking about, which is pre-existing entities can qualify as qualified opportunity funds. I got a call recently, companies making an investment in several real estate projects. They've already made the investment. They've realized they're in an opportunity zone. Well, what does that mean? I said, well, I have got the person you need to talk to that can get in the nuances of how to navigate pre-existing investments, pre-existing business activities you're doing that is falling in an opportunity zone, and how to kind of address that. I will say I don't make referrals, but I do have a couple of people that are kind of the Kentucky subject matter experts. If you want me to connect, anybody wants me to connect you with those folks, they typically, the attorney and the accountant, typically we give presentations, the three of us, with the Kentucky Bar Association and Kentucky Association of CPAs on this specific topic. So I always try to defer to them just because they are actively dealing with this more than anybody I've seen in the state. And so connect with me after if a referral or introduction would help. I don't make referrals, I make introductions. So what can a qualified opportunity fund invest in? The most exciting part of all. Pretty much anything in theory. Again, a qualified opportunity fund operates a trade business directly. You've got to meet the 90% asset test, as I've kind of already hit on. If a qualified opportunity fund invests in a qualified OZ business, the entity must be a qualified opportunity zone business, both when the qualified opportunity fund acquires the equity interest in the entity and during the substantially 90% test during the holding period of that. I imagine that this seems just over the top in detail, but this has all been crafted in an effort to try to prevent folks from gaming this tax credit and those types of things. And again, that's why I bring in that attorney and CPA subject matter expert when folks are looking at forming these. So first, the opportunity zone business, substantially all, 70% or more of the tangible property owned or leased should be the qualified opportunity zone business property. Opportunity zone business property is property that is used for qualified opportunity zone and also require new capital to be employed in a qualified opportunity zone. Again, more details here talking about the tangible property and that item that I spoke of there. This slide is mainly really talking about the substantial improvement and what that test is to qualify for this to hit everything with the IRS and the federal regulation. Some details about the lease has to be entered into on this slide after December 2017. Substantially all of the use of leased tangible property must be in a qualified opportunity zone during substantially all of the period for which the business leases the property. Lease must be a market rate lease as determined by the rate that would be paid in an arm's length transaction. Some info here on non-qualifying financial property. I'm not going to read the slides. I'll let you all kind of read this. Question we get a lot is, what do we do when a piece of property, piece of commercial property, apartment building, is straddling the census tract line? Part of it is in an opportunity zone, part of it is not. This is very much what I have found, a case-by-case basis on how this is being handled. If you can typically make a fair argument if, depending on the square footage, if it could still qualify if it's straddling that line. And so get hit with this question a lot around the state, and a lot of calls on this. Talking about active conduct in actively operating in the business entity, active conduct being including the ownership and operation of real property. This includes leasing property. Triple net leasing property is not permitted. Good to note if you're looking at using the Opportunity Zone Fund to make a real estate play. Certainly one of the most interesting slides in the whole presentation, looking at the eligibility for deferral on gains. Some really nice details there. They call it the 180-day rule for deferral of gains. To be able to defer a gain, a taxpayer must generally invest in a qualified opportunity fund during the 180-day period beginning on the date of the sale or exchange giving rise to the gain. Unless otherwise specifically provided in the regulations, the first day of the 180-day period is the date on which the gain would be recognized for federal income tax purposes. A good example of this, somebody is invested in a business, the business has been acquired by a third party. You've got 180 days to find another qualifying business activity to invest in. That'd be the same if you're looking at, say, income property. Gains eligible for deferral. Attributes include income when gain deferral ends. Gain not already subject to an election. Some further details there on the deferral. Some considerations when you're dealing with partnerships and S-corps, if you're looking at forming a fund, and some very important considerations. Looking at interim gains, if a qualified opportunity fund sells qualified opportunity zone property, the benefit to investors is not affected so long as the qualified opportunity fund reinvests the proceeds in another qualified asset within 12 months. Again, noting the real estate play that a lot of folks are using these funds for. Sales proceeds must be held in cash, cash equivalent, etc. Investors in qualified opportunity fund partnerships will generally still recognize the interim gains under an application or ordinary tax principles. Certainly there's some tax benefits related to investing in opportunity zones as well. What we worked with the legislature on was to put together, as you can see right here on the screen, where we're mirroring, and for Kentucky income tax purposes, the opportunity zone gains deferrals would be treated the same as the federal are. So most importantly, how do we attract investment to your communities? maximizing the benefit for your community to attract investment from Opportunity Zone funds. As I mentioned, investors will probably not just show up on your doorstep looking at projects to invest in. Developing the strategy to identify potential investments and opportunities for the investors. Certainly the prospectus that you all already have is accomplishing that. And the next chapter of that is how do we take specific projects and bring in funds to say we want to invest in this and help in the continual growth and transformation of Paducah. Are there other local programs, incentives that could be considered? Certainly we have a lot of incentives for businesses through the Cabinet for Economic Development in Frankfort. Is there any of those the project might be looking at as well? If they are, certainly I'm happy to help walk you through that with one of our project managers or incentive team people up there. So here's a look at the interface on the KYOZ website. This is how you go in and basically post a potential project. And we do have a fair amount of funds that are referencing the website looking for investable projects to kind of look at. And the projects kind of run the gamut when you go on there to look at, I would say the best word is quality. The quality of the projects on there kind of run the gamut of what they look like across the state. But that's what it looks like for you to post a project. If you've got a project or a property you own in an Opportunity Zone fund, I would encourage you to go on here and certainly post that project. This is kind of the next part of that interface when you go in to post. And then who you want to be the point of contact on that project. The next part of this is how are we going to market the Opportunity Zone? How do we make it attractive for the potential investor? As your prospectus does here, you know, you've got photos, you've got renderings, you're painting the picture of what it can be. You know, and as we look at this, I've looked at several cities outside of the state and how they've put those together, the consultants. Very interesting. You know, Louisville was one of the first cities in Kentucky to have a full-blown prospectus, and they do a really nice job in that prospectus of painting that picture of the art of the potential, of what this could potentially be in revitalizing, say, the Louisville Palace as an example, and you can kind of go down the list. So this is something I wanted to share with the folks here that I find really interesting. I wrote a grant back in the fall and submitted it to the Appalachia Regional Commission, ARC in DC, and what this grant is funding capacity building for opportunity zones in these designated ARC counties, 54 counties. Now, I'm very well aware that I'm not in eastern Kentucky. I am in Paducah. But I really wanted to share this with you because I think this is something we need to lean into, and we need to say, how can, and you know, I don't know how all the service lines work out here, but how can a TVA, how can a Delta Regional Authority create a similar program and say we want to build the capacity of driving investment into these Opportunity Zone Fund designated areas, and this is a capacity building grant. You know, where I'm hiring consultants, I'm hiring the marketing firm to create the prospectus in these rural areas of Kentucky. And so I really want to, you know, my marketing person started to take this slide out, and I wanted to include it because I want to get the conversation going and the thought process. You know, how do we talk to those folks and say, this is something that we think is going to really drive transformational activity in the region of West Kentucky. So that's my little pitch on that. So one of the options someone might say is, okay, I'm wanting to build cabins and camping space to attract investments. And I've got a couple of slides in here. I think you'll find it interesting. One is from a rural part of the state. One is from Louisville. And then as we get on in here to different options, I was able to get them to sprinkle in some stuff that's specific to Paducah. So I want to build camping space, cabins for people to come visit, and I want to build this in an opportunity zone area. Well, the way Louisville deals with that, granted metropolitan area, this is how their prospectus put this together. Looking at the west end of redevelopment, what are the opportunities in West Louisville for redevelopment? It's a gold mine up there, and what the potential is in reframing that area. The prospectus that Louisville uses does a really nice job of framing this, where they're looking at partnering with the Louisville Urban League, $35 million multi-use athletic facility in the Russell neighborhood, redevelopment of the Madison Streets warehouse into a small incubator of complementary hotels, retail, restaurants, multifamily. What does that investment look like? It also defines out what are those assets, who owns those assets in those areas. Granted, this isn't camping recreation, but this is a potential destination site that could be recast, re-envisioned in Louisville. So how many here have ever been to the Red River Gorge? Rock climbing? Oh, we got a lot of hands. Yeah, great area. As you see in the top left, there is some of the census tracts that are designated in that area where Natural Bridge, Red River Gorge, and all that is. If you've seen in the news any lately, there's a 600-acre recreation facility that's trying to come in there. We will see if that ends up happening. I love nature, and so certainly encourage all the economic growth, but it is pretty amazing out there, untouched as it is. But certainly that group that's looking at coming in is leaning into the opportunity zone and putting that there. Community might say we have 175 acres ready for residential industrial development. Say that's the question that you're faced with. As your prospectus outlines for Paducah, the Rivertown District, downtown Paducah. What are those assets? City currently owns property in the Rivertown District, 20 acres of property available for redevelopment. City's working with the existing owners as part of a 3 to 5 year investment program. I'm not familiar with all the details of that program, but I like it. Sounds really good. What is that opportunity? The prospectus does a really nice job of framing this out for somebody that has no familiarity with the area. City of Paducah identified as a river town as an area positioned to bridge an active downtown to the growing neighborhoods, utilizing resources such as tax incremental financing, local fee revenue, and other tools to assist in the Rivertown District. So looking at this, I'm assuming is that 3.1 acres, that block? Is that what that is up there? Well, regardless of whatever, that might just be that's not the census tract number. Yeah. Anyway, certainly what an opportunity you have out here. And, I think, again, curating those investable opportunities and to frame that to an out-of-area fund as to why this is transformational and why they need to invest, whether it's a multifamily property, whether it's a hotel, whatever the case is, that right there will be the kind of where you cross the threshold and are able to gain the investments. So here's an example from the Louisville prospectus on that same question. 175 acres, it can be residential, it can be industrial, depending on zoning. What does it look like for this area? And this is the Louisville citation. The assets, multi-use area owned by the Louisville Metro Housing Authority, adjacent to Park Duval and the hoped-for redevelopment area. Parkland Family Scholars House, providing housing to single mothers pursuing higher education. That's great. What are the opportunities in that area? Investing in retail, restaurants, office, residential use in an underserved market of Louisville. And then you're helping to invigorate a historic center for the African American ownership community. Certainly, all of these things would be things that I would want to include in my pitch to a potential fund, because some of the funds have definitely got a social mission aspect to them. How do we achieve the investment criteria? And then, oh, I really like this. I want to invest in rural, or I really want to invest in this revitalization. You're seeing that a lot with venture capital funds too, how they can not only achieve X rate of return, but they can also achieve their kind of closely held social impact. Another example that I include for folks in this question is a rural example. Pikeville, the affordable housing question. There's a massive demand for affordable housing down in Pikeville, a shortage. We have developers down there who are looking at how do we create this opportunity? Are we getting it through a traditional bank financing? Are we doing it through opportunity zone investing and those types of things? So again, there's some examples of what's going on down there, specifically the photo on the bottom left. Option 3, and you'll certainly see a lot of option 3 on the projects listed on the KYOZ website. We've got an empty building that we want to repurpose. What should we do? What would be the best use of this property? And amazingly, your prospectus helped fill this in for me to highlight what you've got here in Paducah. The Columbia Theater. Not sure if that's an area, a building that I have been to before or not, but historic theater in the primary commercial corridor. Approximately $1.5 million already been invested into the building. What's the opportunity? Restore the Columbia Theater to an active mixed-use community gathering place for greater Paducah, and it aligns with the arts, the art house, and investors. Really nice one there. You know, and the thing that I would be thinking on this type of project to take it a step further would be how do you put it in a framing to an investment group of them getting their required rate of return. That would be something that I would be thinking about for that conversation if I'm pitching this project. Another example here that goes in with that question about we've got an empty building, we want to repurpose. Looking at the neighborhood Renaissance, Artisan, Logan Street Market. Currently, they've been redeveloping a 25,000 square foot public market in a former tobacco warehouse, space for dozens of local vendors, food incubators, all kinds of stuff for folks to sell, microbrewery, you know, and the opportunity, they define it as investing in Louisville's first public market and small business in that Logan Street ecosystem. So again, I kind of hit on this earlier, and we won't kind of tarry on this too long. You know, why is my area county not in an opportunity zone? I try to really frame out there at the beginning how these areas were defined and chosen. The number one thing is the areas that were submitted. We compared those to the areas that came through the mapping tool that looks at how can investment lead to economic prosperity in these communities. What if a project is in an opportunity zone fund that extends into an area that it's not? That would be where you analyze the square footage of the project, and I can guide you to the federal regulation and nail that down too. So, expected timeline, most amazing. We're in 2020, which is hard to believe. Somebody said St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I can't believe it's already here. But at any rate, the timeline, we're in the period of having everyone, every community that wants to, develop a prospectus, be reaching out to funds with investable projects, and fully getting into scale mode. Again, I'll just remind you, the kyoz.com is the website, and any questions, feel free to email me